Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're diving straight into the legendary 7 wonders of the ancient world. Now, when most of us picture these ancient marvels, we're actually imagining a famous list of detailed illustrations that was published way back in 1572. But here's the catch. Those 16th century drawings were based heavily on old, highly exaggerated descriptions, not first-hand reports. To find the real origins of this list, we have to trace the concept back over 1,500 years earlier to a document called the Lighthouse of Alexandria. Created around 200 BC in Alexandria, which was literally the absolute center of global knowledge at the time, this document listed the greatest mountains, the greatest generals, and yes, the 7 most incredible structures of the ancient world.
But hey, before we get too lost marveling at these structures, I've got a quick question for you to keep in the back of your mind as we go through this explainer. What ancient marvel was so incredibly massive that its scrapped ruins required a caravan of 900 camels just to carry it away? Think about that for a second. Before we can solve the mystery of those 900 camels, we need to embark on a journey across the ancient Mediterranean to separate historical fact from popular myth. And really, there's no better place to start than with the ultimate ancient benchmark of scale and precision.
Section 1. The only surviving wonder. We kick things off in Egypt with the Great Pyramid of Giza. Commissioned as an eternal, secure tomb for Pharaoh Khufu around 2600 BC, this is the only wonder from that original list that is actually still standing today. And it didn't just stand, it completely dominated. For an unbelievable 3,800 years, all the way until the Lincoln Cathedral was finished in the 14th century, it reigned as the tallest man-made structure on Earth, rising nearly 147 meters high.
To achieve that kind of height, the sheer volume of material they used is honestly almost impossible to wrap your head around. It was built with approximately 2.3 million individual stone blocks. And we're not talking about simple bricks here. Even the absolute lightest stones used in this construction weighed roughly 2.5 tons. To put that into a modern perspective, that is roughly the same weight as a Tesla Cybertruck. Just try to imagine hauling millions of those into a perfect geometric shape 4,600 years ago.
But it wasn't just a massive pile of rocks, right? The true marvel is the absolute precision. The pyramid boasts a true north alignment where each of its 4 sides faces north, south, east, and west with an error margin of less than 1/10 of a degree. Inside, the king's chamber used specialized red granite blocks. Some of these blocks weigh up to 80 tons, which is about the weight of a commercial Boeing 737. And the real kicker? The Egyptians didn't just muscle these into place, they imported them from Aswan, a city over 800 kilometers away, likely floating them down the Nile River.
So, the million-dollar question is, how did they actually build it? Experts still fiercely debate the construction method even today. On one side, we have the widely accepted theory of massive earth ramps. But for workers to safely drag those stones up an 8-degree incline, those external ramps would have to be impossibly long. So the crucial point on the other side of the debate is this ingenious internal counterweight system. This theory suggests they used the internal Grand Gallery to drop counterweights, basically leveraging the laws of physics to pull those massive 80-ton stones up a central ramp. The fact that this mystery is still unsolved today just makes the whole thing all the more spectacular.
Section 2. Mystery of the Gardens. Alright, let's move from a wonder you can literally go touch today to the one wonder experts aren't even sure actually existed, the Hanging Gardens. Ancient authors described a colossal square stone structure with multi-level terraces. Huge trees and lush plants supposedly grew high above the ground. Now, pulling that off would require an unbelievable volume of raised soil and a constant, heavy flow of water cascading from one terrace down to the next.
To keep a garden like that alive in such a harsh climate, you'd need some seriously advanced plumbing. Ancient stories claimed that a device functioning just like the Archimedes screw was used to lift water up to each terrace. By rotating a spiral inside a tube, you can manually push water upward against gravity. It sounds like the perfect solution, doesn't it? But historical detective work totally debunks this popular myth. Why? Because the Archimedes screw wasn't actually invented until about 350 years later.
Because we've found literally 0 archaeological ruins, the real mystery might actually just be a massive historical mistranslation. On one hand, legend says King Nebuchadnezzar II built it in Babylon around 600 BC as a gift for his homesick wife, trying to replicate her mountainous homeland. But there are 0 records to back this up. The competing theory? It was actually located in the older, grander city of Nineveh. There, King Sennacherib built heavily documented, highly advanced stone aqueducts stretching 50 kilometers, since some Assyrian sources referred to Nineveh as Old Babylon and the region as Babylonia. The Hanging Gardens of Babylon might have actually been the Hanging Gardens of Nineveh all along.
Section 3. Beacons and Divine Statues. Our journey sails on to Alexandria, the magnificent ancient trading hub founded by Alexander the Great, to look at a wonder whose existence is highly documented. Imagine being an ancient sailor approaching this bustling coastal metropolis. Guiding you safely to shore was the Lighthouse of Alexandria. It was an absolute mammoth three-tiered structure, a square base, an octagonal middle, and a cylindrical top crowned with a divine statue, likely of Zeus or Poseidon. By day, a giant mirror reflected the sunlight, and by night, a massive fire burned, guiding ships from reportedly up to 50 kilometers away.
The lighthouse was originally called the Pharos, named after the island it stood on, and this brilliantly illustrates how deeply these wonders impacted human culture. The structure was so iconic that it literally changed our global vocabulary. To this day, Pharos remains the root word for lighthouse in Greek, French, Spanish, and several other languages. It stood tall for an astonishing 1,500 years before devastating earthquakes finally collapsed it into ruins. But its stones didn't just go to waste. They were eventually repurposed to build a medieval fortress right there on the island. Meanwhile, over in ancient Greece, we have a wonder you actually had to see indoors. In Olympia, the hometown of the Olympic Games, the legendary sculptor Phidias created the jaw-dropping statue of Zeus around 435 BC. Seated on a throne, it was 12 meters tall, so huge it practically scraped the temple ceiling. Crafted from massive quantities of gold and ivory, it was an overwhelming sight. They even placed a pool of dark oil on the floor in front of it to reflect the light and create an optical illusion, making the statue seem even more towering. It was so majestic that the philosopher Epictetus claimed you could only die happy after witnessing it. But unfortunately, being awe-inspiring doesn't guarantee preservation, and this masterpiece met a pretty tragic end. Hundreds of years after its creation, Emperor Theodosius I introduced Christianity and effectively banned pagan practices and imagery around 391 AD. The Greek god was no longer welcome in Olympia. It was packed up and relocated to a wealthy collector's palace in Constantinople, modern-day Istanbul. Sadly, that palace was struck by a devastating fire in the 5th century, and the gold and ivory masterpiece was lost forever.
Section 4. Ancient Temples and Tombs. We shift our focus now to modern-day Turkey, where we find structures that served entirely different purposes for ancient society, starting with the Temple of Artemis in Ephesus. Constructed entirely of brilliant marble, this wasn't just a quiet place to pray. It was the absolute bustling heart of the city. It acted as a religious center, a shelter for refugees seeking asylum, and most surprisingly, it was practically the Bank of Asia. Kings and ordinary citizens alike stored their fortunes securely within its walls.
But this temple had a notoriously chaotic yet resilient history. The first iteration was completely wiped out by a massive flood in the 7th century BC, so they rebuilt it. Then, centuries later in 356 BC, legend says on the exact night Alexander the Great was born, a man obsessed with becoming famous committed arson and burned it straight to the ground. Alexander actually later offered to pay for a rebuild, but the locals politely declined, choosing to fund it themselves. And they didn't just rebuild it, they supersized it. The final version was a 137-meter-long mammoth surrounded by 127 soaring columns, a size confirmed by the Roman historian Pliny the Elder.
Just a quick 200-kilometer trip away in Halicarnassus stood another colossal architectural triumph. Built around 350 BC for the ruler of Caria, the spectacular 40-meter-tall tomb beautifully blended classic Greek architecture with an Egyptian purpose. Sitting on a massive stone base, flanked by stone lions and hundreds of statues, it featured a stepped, pyramid-like roof that set it apart from absolutely anything else in the Greek world. And crowning the very top of this multi-level marvel was a colossal sculpture of a 4-horse chariot.
The ruler it was built for was named Mausoleum, and just like the Pharos of Alexandria, this wonder left another permanent linguistic Easter egg for all of us. The structure was so breathtaking and unprecedented that his name, Mausoleum, became the universal term for any giant, impressive tomb. The mausoleum at Halicarnassus stood proud for centuries until it was slowly chipped away by a series of earthquakes between the 1100s and 1400s.
Section 5. The Epic Finale. This is the story of the Colossus of Rhodes, and the answer to our opening mystery. This whole thing takes place during the Wars of the Successors, when the thriving merchant city of Rhodes became the target of a terrifying siege by a powerful general named Demetrius.
Now, Demetrius didn't just show up with a regular army, he brought the Helipolis. This was a terrifying, state-of-the-art siege tower that stood nearly 40 meters tall. To give you an idea of the sheer terror this thing invoked, it was heavily armored and weighed over 160 tons. That is roughly equivalent to a massive adult blue whale slowly rolling toward the city walls.
But the people of Rhodes, they held strong. The siege lasted almost a year before it became entirely too expensive for Demetrius, and he was forced to retreat, leaving all his massive siege weapons behind. The incredibly resourceful locals dismantled that 160-ton Helipolis and the other abandoned weapons, melted them down, and sold the scrap metal. This generated an absolute fortune, 300 talents of silver, which is worth millions of dollars today. They used this immense war booty to commission the sculptor Shari of Lindos to build a 32-meter bronze tribute to the sun god Helios. We of course know it as the Colossus of Rhodes.
Now, because we have no physical ruins left, creative freedom has kind of run wild over the centuries. You have likely seen popular depictions showing the Colossus standing with its legs spread wide, straddling the harbor entrance as massive ships sail underneath. It's a fantastic visual, right? But structural physics actually proves that would have been entirely impossible to build and support at the time. The reality is that the Colossus stood firmly beside the harbor, though it was still so massive that sailors looking up at it likely felt as if they were sailing directly under the sun god's gaze.
The timeline of the Colossus is perhaps the most tragic of all the wonders. It took 12 grueling years to construct using huge earth ramps, and after all that effort, it only stood proudly for a mere 56 years. In 226 BC, a powerful earthquake hit, snapping the massive bronze statue right at the knees. Surprisingly, the people of Rhodes chose not to rebuild it. Instead, the broken god lay on the ground, serving as a wildly famous ancient tourist attraction in its ruined state for over 800 years.
And this finally answers our opening question. In 653 AD, Arab forces captured the city of Rhodes. They saw the value in the ruins, broke down what remained of the Great Colossus, and melted the bronze down for scrap. According to historical accounts, hauling away the metal from this once magnificent wonder required a massive caravan of 900 camels. The statue that was born from scrapped siege weapons ultimately ended its life as scrap metal itself, carried away into history.
This entire journey is just a fascinating look at how human ambition continually pushes the absolute limits of engineering, wealth, and artistry. We build incredible things to guarantee we are remembered. But seeing how fires, floods, earthquakes, and time wiped away almost every single one of these structural giants leaves us with a pretty humbling thought. If even the greatest, most celebrated wonders of the ancient world eventually turn to dust and scrap metal, what modern monuments of ours will actually survive the next 2 millennia?